and thank you for coming. I'd like to invite you to think about the question, is TOD in the city and the way it's been promoted at this point in time, is it not a real estate-driven agenda for Cape Town? So please think about that while I talk. We're going to quickly talk about terms and definitions that constantly crop up in planning and design. We're going to talk about the Cape Town context and ask the question, can you hear me now? Ask the question, what does the Cape Town context tell us? What is the role of streets? Can you hear me now? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so the fourth point, what are the implications for design, which is what Jody will talk about, and then the key challenges for TOD design. So to start, these terms are the terms that often crop up in planning and design, and they are part of what we do, and that's embedded in our minds as planners and designers. So the first one is highest and best use, and I'm not going to spell it out for you because you can read it for yourselves, but what I want to show you is that the value of a property, the highest value of the property being valued is what the operative words are in the definition of highest and best use. And it crops up in every terms of reference and every piece of work that the planner and urban designer do. Then the extent of desirability is a term that is in our Cape Town Municipal Planning Bylaw. It also comes into effect through the National Environmental Management Act. The environmentalists also now talk about need and desirability. And what's common about those two terms is that they have an economic focus. It's always about viability and financial feasibility. Then there's the term land value capture, which I think came up in the first presentation by Sean, and it refers to a process by which all or a portion of increments in land value attributed to public and community interventions are recouped by the public sector. So there are three actions to land value capture. The first one is that you valorize land, whether public or private, so you rezone it and it increases its value, or you add infrastructure to it and it increases its value. And then the second action is to try and recoup the value by the public sector of that value that's been added. Then the third part is then the redistribution of that value once it's been recouped. So to cut a long story short, I'd like you to just bear those three actions in mind. I'd like to also say that TOD, as Sean tried to point out, is across the world, it's very much linked to land value capture. And there are certain mechanisms that you use to implement the land value capture returns and recoup of money. But it can lead to exclusion as well of a number of people and operators within the space. So I think the previous speaker addressed the Gini coefficient. It was on one of the slides, but essentially Cape Town, although it has a low Gini coefficient, it's still very high compared to other world cities, and it shows that we have a very high level of inequality in our city. So the context is telling us that inequality is concentrated in the metros in South Africa and in Cape Town in our case. And I borrowed the 40-40-40 percent from Francois Verulli, Professor Francois Verulli, who says that poorer people, that they live in 40 square meters of RDP house extent or area, and they travel 40 kilometers from where they live to their place of work, and then they spend 40% of their disposable income on traveling to wherever they travel to, and particularly to their place of work. So this came up in Sean's presentation as well. The late Peter Wilkinson, he concluded that one needs different strategies due to the dualistic transportation condition that we have in Cape Town. And I think Sean spoke to that. But I think what it means from a TOD point of view is that in the Metro Southeast, that there is already a captive market there. The TOD strategy, therefore, should be focused on improving access to urban opportunities and would need to be publicly driven. That's the key aspect of the Metro Southeast TOD strategy. Then the second part of what he said was that along the southern and northern corridors, which are mature corridors, the TOD objective would have to be to increase ridership, and in all likelihood would be market-driven. So there was a study that was done in 2010-11, at the time in Kathy's department, and it was to evaluate the quality public space program that the city ran at the time. And the findings were, and there was a very big survey that was done across Cape Town, the findings were that the most basic elements required of a quality public space, trying to preamble the quality of streets and public spaces that Jody will be talking about, that they include the list of things that you see there: lighting, safety and security, shelter, ablutions. Often people come from where they live and they come through these spaces. They use the ablutions because they don't necessarily have ablutions where they live. Electricity, recreational spaces, and so on. And then the respondents also made reference to 5 functions expected of a public space. So this is the majority city that we're talking about, not the elite city. And they spoke about recreation and sports, places for the soul, such as somewhere to sit and contemplate, access to transport interchanges, that was a key thing, and it had to have public facilities. There needed to be a cluster of facilities that people could use. They spoke about an urban square where they could mingle with other people and also encounter other people. And then it needed to be an economic hub as well. So the synthesis of the context, I don't necessarily want to go through, except to say that when we plan and design generally, whether it's TOD or not, we take a land market approach to property development, and we take a land market approach to city making. TOD has the potential to strengthen that approach, and hence my question to you, and provocation in a sense: are we not trying to create a real estate-driven agenda for Cape Town through the TOD policy? And I think we must think about it very carefully. So we have a highly unequal city, and it needs to use TOD in different ways, as the councillor pointed out. We need to integrate our city and improve quality of life. And then the citizens of Cape Town, as you saw from the public space survey that we did, they see public spaces as a means of providing a range of facilities and services. And that requires space, which takes up space for property development, and it also requires high levels of public investment. Thank you.
How many minutes have I got? Okay, I feel like the cat among the pigeons, because I've got a spatial background, so I guess that's why Marco made us stand up here with a lot of specialists, which is incredibly intimidating. But moving on to the kind of the more spatial aspects of the presentation, kind of stating the obvious, but really just to remind us all that the role of streets, really public right-of-ways, but conduits for transportation services, both goods and people, that obviously includes people on foot in our context, They play a utility role as a carrier of bulk networks. So that's everything from electrical cables to water and sewage pipes, but they're also, in fact, a critical part of the stormwater network. And on the other hand, they also, as we've heard, can address basic needs and do currently as a kind of an escape space, as a space of refuge, in a sense, from the kind of the dense, small, inward-facing private spaces. They have obviously immense potential for economic exchange, so that's everything ranging from kind of informal street vending to more formal businesses who maximise on the thresholds that utilise that street network. And then there are obviously places of social exchange, and that's incredibly important when you're talking about cities as places that encourage integration and social transformation. So we've got this tension between these two groupings of kind of street roles. On the one hand, the previous slide was talking about the kind of roles that inevitably lead to streets becoming barriers and separators. And on the other hand, you have these the set of roles which is about seeing the street as those spaces that pull people together. So what are the implications for street design in Cape Town? Given what Nisa said about the context and others have said, we need to allow for the benefits of agglomerations of people to be felt, enable access to opportunities for a full spectrum of economic players. The streets need to provide relief for people from their small private worlds and allow for the coming together of both individuals and communities. And then you start answering to basic needs, and that might include toilets and water, and the obvious one being access to transport services. The banks and internet, I'm not saying that we need to put banks and internet into the street themselves, but the streets need to be supported by those kind of land uses. And what does it mean for the design of streets as a component of TOD? Well, then we need to specify that TOD must do X number of things, including provide that range of services, amenities, and space for unprogrammable activities, whether those are economic or social. They need to provide for a range of local economic operators to find their place in that system. Obviously, need to densify and intensify, and from a spatial perspective, that's incredibly important because we need verticality in order to start making spaces that define, contain, and make people feel safe and protected from elements. That at the same time, you've got to be careful about overdoing it. And then that main transit station, together with the other transport facilities, has to be conceived as part of a kind of a seamless system where people can walk from one to the other easily. And that network of intellect spaces needs to be activated by particular land uses. And I think that's our fear, that the stations currently, and I know it's a starting point, and we need to think that this is the environments are going to change incrementally over time, but they are currently very isolated from their surrounds. So these are just images to start to thinking about what kind of place these TOD environments might be, especially in the context of the Metro Southeast. And Mitchell's Plain CBD, for me, is a really good example of the potential the only thing for me that it doesn't do is that it doesn't include residential, and it's not vertical enough. So if you added residential to the mix, we might come close to what a successful TOD environment might be. It's got a bus, it's got the buses, it's got the rail, and it's got feeder services. 2 minutes. Okay. So, continuing with the things that we've got to do to ensure that these TOD nodes allow streets to play a positive function is try and ensure the design of that street network is prioritised for pedestrians, and that's a really difficult task. Parking needs to be managed, if not minimised. The ground floor of the urban development blocks needs to be activated. Urban development blocks must be appropriately scaled. In some cases, they can get too big, and we need to start talking about how those urban blocks can be traversable by people on foot when they get too big. And TOD must be conceived as an intensification of the surrounding living environments, not a discrete economic hub. So the key challenges for me as a designer and planner, first of all, the reluctance of state departments to implement in partnership with each other and with the private sector. So we carry on delivering health, education, and housing in these discrete pockets. It's highly problematic. Those images are of Khayelitsha CBD, and it's not a fantastic environment. The other one, accommodation of small economic operators is challenging given that you need the bigger economic operators to be partners in this. The extent of land and the low value of land, particularly in the Metro Southeast, there's no incentive to develop vertically. For me, that's a fundamental stumbling block. The private sector demands parking in a secure perimeter. They continue to do, even though the policy in our zoning scheme are encouraging other. And the larger scale private sector partners need larger scale urban blocks, which is obviously a problem for those on foot. And then just to finish, traffic modelling still assumes there's a limited shift in mode from private to public, so that the capacity of the roads for vehicles is not reduced. Road geometric design does not easily allow for prioritisation of pedestrians, and the scale, the width of the roads carrying these trunk services currently is already, for me, a problem. That lower images of Atlantis, and they serve as a barrier currently. I'm sure, in 20 years' time it will change, but it is an issue that we need, and a challenge that we need to be aware of. And I think that just in closing, it's a difficult job, but I think us as built professionals, including traffic and planning and design, need to really apply our minds in a very considered way through the scales, across the disciplines, and across that public-private line. So in other words, the interface between the urban block and that street network, which is absolutely critical. And just to leave you with some kind of maybe some images that will spark conversation. I've been very anti-grade separation all this time, but I'm beginning to think that there might be a way of handling these barriers by grade separation. So you're putting a street on another level. The image below was of India, where that ground plane can continue to play a much finer grained activity role. And the Warwick Triangle is the reverse. It brings the street above ground. And in the Greenpoint Stadium circle, which I've always been very anti, I think, with activated the right kind of land use at ground level, that can work. And I put that image in because for me, it begins to talk to possibilities maybe for Philippi, where there's a proposal for a very big circle of that nature. And then the images on the left are just, optimally it would be better to get these transit stations to be more integrated. And maybe that will happen in time. And the other kind of key idea or solution is this idea of the multi-level stations, and Metro Mall is a fantastic example of that. It offers seamless transition between the street and the urban block, and the streets are literally extended across and into the development. There's also obviously great integration between land use and transport in that case. Okay, sorry, I don't want to